5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Ernest.
And together we're L&E Explore Books. Today we're so excited. We have a couple of books that we've either finished or are currently reading, in addition to what we're planning to read next. But I wanted to start with a little special shout out to Miss Blake. She made these fabulous masks for us. They're so cute. And what's so awesome, she also included a note talking about how she's been watching our YouTube channel and gave some book recommendations as well. So that was super awesome. It totally made my week. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Super appreciate it. Now, we're going to start talking about some books.
Yes.
So I'm going to show my Kindle Oasis right here because I love reading on all different mediums. So I read paperback hardcover books. I also love audiobooks and ebooks. So I received an advanced reader copy of the novel Vesper Flights by Helen Macdonald. And this is an incredible series of essays written by author Macdonald, and I just thought it was an incredible work. It was beautiful. It really highlighted the intricacies of humanity and how we disassociate ourselves sometimes as like humans versus the natural world oftentimes, or that we don't include ourselves within that process. And this book really dives into particularly looking at birds, how humans often perceive birds in ways that they perceive themselves. And so it talked a lot about how we orient ourselves to animals. And so like we give emotions, for example, like if my dog sighs, I'm like, oh my goodness, my dog is just stressed out or tired. Whether or not that's an actual true statement, it's more a representation of how I perceive the world around me and how I also give characteristics that are human to animals. The book talked about so many different topics. It was really fascinating. I think one of the topics that I was really interested in one of the essays was talking about how birds are perceived, it really differs based on socioeconomic status, and how there's a lot of placement and value and like pride in these nature reserves where animals are, the hope is that they're set back into the wild or that they're in a space that's considered less caged, versus they talked about particularly working class folks like loving birds and having them in their homes and like that becoming like a family member, and just this culture surrounding breeding birds to have these beautiful and unique birds, and how often that's frowned upon and that certain types of birding are seen as acceptable and others are not. And so I thought that that was a really powerful essay and made me think a lot. I also think something that's often talked about within this is this idea of how birds and how our climate and our environment, because there are shifts and changes, that's really changed the movement and the experiences of birds. It talked about how swallowtails are really struggling to find places to rest in many parts of England because of the eaves and houses. There's no longer like space for them to build a nest. And she was talking about the reason why this often happens, in fact, is because we're just not aware. We're not aware of what animal habitats require and how our choices make significant impacts on the world of birds and other creatures. And so I definitely recommend this work if you're looking for something that it felt very much like having a warm conversation filled with thought processing and dialogue with the author. And so I really valued it. I thought it was so nuanced and interesting and full of wisdom, but I also felt like there was a lot of humor and moments where I actually laughed during the work. So it is now out, so I definitely recommend looking up Vesper Flights by Helen Macdonald.
Shall we talk about the books that we're currently reading?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay. I was not able to finish Neverworld Wake. I'm about 65% done with it, but I would love to give you an update on what's going on and things I like about it. So, like I said before, the main character is Beatrice. She and her friends meet up for this high school reunion of sorts. After they graduate in college and everything, they meet up for the first time in a long time since a friend passed away during their senior year, their friend Ted. He was like the catalyst of their group and really brought them together. So Patrice meets up with her friends Cannon, Whitley, Kipping, and Martha for this weekend trip at a mansion. They end up going to a concert, having a good time, and kind of catching up. But the whole time, Patrice's main intention is to talk about Ted and kind of figure out what happened to him and why he died in kind of mysterious circumstances. They ruled it a suicide, but she thinks it wasn't a suicide because of all the things that he had planned for the future. But during their time going to the mansion, they get into an accident that causes them to be in this Neverworld Wake world, and now they have to make a voting decision. So the layout is this: that there's 5 of them, only one of them can stay alive, and they all have to make a vote, and all have to come to a common consensus about who will be the one to remain alive after this accident. But during that time, they're in like this infinite loop where each of them have a certain amount of time to kind of do things and decide. Maybe talk it out, negotiate, and then at a certain time, like during the time of their death window, they have to sit down and make that voting decision. But because of, not believing that that's really the case, they don't want to make a vote, or like any individual, I would say, in the circumstances will say, I want to be the one to remain alive. I don't want to vote for someone else and say, I die, but you are worthy of life more than me. And that causes them to kind of, break apart. But eventually, they come to a decision to do something else instead. And that's where I'm at. The story is really good. I like that I follow it directly in one person's point of view the whole entire time, Patrice. And the rest, you just hear about their ins and outs a little bit, but you really don't know about their thoughts as the mystery unfolds. I wouldn't say it's necessarily scary, but it is suspenseful and makes you think of who should you be rooting for and who you think is the one that should, remain alive. And like Lauren talked about last time, like maybe coming up with an idea that all of them can stay alive. I don't think that's possible, but I'm not going to rule it out. But it's definitely a really interesting book. I highly recommend it. I laughed a few times with some of the shenanigans, and I think every character is different in some way, but all these characters either deal with privilege, family privilege because of their wealth, economic, or their own issues personally, and how that clash, and how people maybe can be two-faced and putting up an act in order to get a result they want. So I definitely recommend it. This is Neverworld Wake by Marissa Pacel. And yeah, it's been a great read. I will be finishing it probably in the next 2 days. And I will be happy. I would love to actually give you guys a full review of my thoughts on it and everything next week. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Is there any sort of reader warnings you would want to recommend for that book? It sounded like you had said a couple.
Warnings, I would say, is it deals with, it talks about suicide. It deals with family issues, parent abuse of a child, and yeah, I think those are the only ones that come to mind. And it's about death. It's heavily about that institution of making a choice of either accepting your death and saying one person should stay alive while the others die, or trying to negotiate. And how you do that when you've been best friends with someone in high school, but years apart, 2-3 years, you come to this meeting and consists like decide who of you gets to live. And your only memories and stuff that really made you know these people are your high school bonding memories. You only had met them for a night. You don't know what they've been doing with their lives so far. So now, as this journey goes, I think you kind of get the idea that you'll slowly find out how these people are and what happened to them during high school and what is going on overall of why they need to make this decision and what brought them to this Neverworld Wake kind of purgatory. Yeah.
Got it. So, I talked a little bit about this. This is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So I am only 14% of the way through the book. So my thoughts are pretty similar to what I shared before. What has happened is essentially there was a flu that happened that turned into this deadly virus that killed many, many people, and it actually completely shifted how civilization is. And so there's no more electricity, there's no more gasoline. 20 years later, people are riding in carriages. There's no, like, an example was people who had played in a band and played electric guitar. That's no longer available, so people are playing stringed instruments. And so we are, at this point, I'm in a journey with this caravan of performers, and they travel from all over the world to be able to bring back theater and bring back music and bring essentially the joy of acting to communities. And so they just came to this community, and it just feels really eerie and weird, and things are very different than when they visited before. And so they're performing a play, and the audience is pretty bare. Like, it feels like it's a very different experience. And so I suspect that there's going to be some conflict coming up. So this will definitely be a book that I'll keep you all updated on. Like I said, I've so far, though, found it really interesting. It definitely is dark. I think if you're going to read this book during a pandemic, I think going into this knowing that there is, like, death from a pandemic in this work. And so definitely still really enjoying it, though. Now, would you like to share what you're going to be reading next?
So the next book I will be reading is by one of my favorite authors, Stefan Chbosky, named Imaginary Friend. The reason I like Stefan Chbosky is he wrote a fantastic book that some people look at as like the new age Catcher in the Rye, but he wrote The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I loved that book in high school. It definitely one of those books that really helped me kind of figure out my own individual self, just like Catcher in the Rye did, but in a more outstanding way of saying that I can be my own individual and not feel so abandoned, and just help, find that ability to say, you can find your group of friends, that there's people out there who are just like you, and you're not alone. And I think that book did a wonderful job. So he, instead of him doing another, I would say young adult literature book like Perks of the Wallflower, he instead chose to go into a horror direction with Imaginary Friend. The synopsis of this book is that a single mother, Kate, and her son, Christopher, kind of run away from a bad situation that I believe has to do with the Christopher's father being his mom was dealing with a spousal abuse. So they run away to a new town and try to start over. But during their time in that new town, Christopher disappears for 6 days. No one know where he's went, and people are looking for him all in town. But after those 6 days, someone finds him coming out of the woods. And now Christopher has a voice in his head. And this voice in his head is telling him that he needs to build this tree house. And if he doesn't do it, then his mother will have an unfortunate event happen to him, and everyone in town will as well. So I think this story is going to be more playing on the things of what actually happened to Christopher during that time apart, and if this voice is actually real or something else. I'm really excited to really dive into this book and find out. It is going to be a long book series. It's about 500 to 600 pages. So I think this is a book I won't have done by next week, but I'll probably give myself 2 weeks. But in between of reading this, I'm going to be reading another book as well that I will probably talk about next week. So I have a book along with Neverworld Wake that I am reading currently, so I can do. Hey, I finished this book as well, and what's my update on Imaginary Friend? Hopefully that gets accomplished. If not, you'll just hear me do my review of Neverworld Wake and my update on Imaginary Friend. But I am excited to dive in this horror literature because I always think about the possibility, as a writer, can you jump to different genres? Can Stephen King write a teen romance story and just be as good as his horror story? Something like that. And yeah, I want to see how Stefan Chbosky does in this tale, because it's definitely different than I thought, but I'm really excited to see what he does with it.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So, this is actually a book that we're both going to be reading. It is called Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. And this book is about suburbia. It's about this family that's in the suburbs. Everything is really planned and structured. Life is really peaceful. Everything is done in a very specific way. And then a single mother and her daughter move to this community, and they live with this family who is like really lived by the structure. And then I guess there is a series of events that happen, and the two families are on opposite sides of believing these events. But because of this, the family who's lived here for a really long time, the mother of that family is like, I'm really interested in the past of the single mother. And so she's like, I'm really interested in her past. I'm gonna start digging. And it sounds like with the information that she digs, that she's gonna find out some things that maybe she shouldn't have dug up. And so it really sounds like this is a lot about like the drama. It's really about like this family. It's about what happens when new people move into a community and there are all these unspoken rules and traditions. I'm really excited. This book has been I'm really excited to read this work. It is recommended by Reese Witherspoon. It is a Hulu series right now, and so I actually haven't watched the series because I want to read the work first. But I'm also going to be discussing this book, Ernest is as well, for one of our book clubs. Yeah. So that's why we picked this one up. Yeah.
Yeah, really excited.
Yeah, I think that those are kind of our next steps for our books. We are really excited moving forward. It's spooky season,
yes.
So
October's in effect.
So we'll definitely continue to be reading and taking that into account for our next books. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If you have any recommendations or if you've read any of these works and have your own thoughts, please feel free to share that with us in the comments. We would love to connect with you about books. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.